우리는 오늘 포럼에서 미국에 우리가 이민한 목적과 또 현재 우리 위치와 그것을 모든 것을 견주어 보면서 우리들의 성공적 이민을 모색하는 중요한 마당입니다. 우리 이민자들은 문화와 언어가 판이하게 다른 미국 땅에 아메리칸 드림을 이루고자 이민한 용감한 그룹입니다. 우리들은 평등 사회를 이루고 있는 미국에서 우리들의 생활 형편의 향상과 자녀들의 무한적 발전을 이루기로 결심하고 이민 가방을 쌌던 선구적인 그룹입니다.
The Korean American community remains detached from the American political mainstream more than any other ethnic groups. This is another factor. It is one that Mr. Park and I have had many conversations about trying to get more representation of the Korean community into the political arena.
In your neighborhood, how many of your neighbors are non-Korean or Asian? 그 옆집에 사는 사람이 동양 사람 아니고 백인인지 아니면 또 anybody? Do you know their names? You know how many kids they have? Barack Obama has a chance to win Georgia because 30% of the population in Georgia is African American. You multiply that by 95%, they're all going to vote for Barack Obama. Let's talk about Korean Americans and Asian Americans in general. That election year, 50% turnout only of the registered voters. 50% turnout of registered voters. So if you calculate how many people, Asian population versus registered voters, that number goes down to 1%, people who actually cast votes. Not for a
One of the things that I see that lacks in the predecessors of the Korean American community is, again, patriotism. I don't know if it's just my family, but I don't remember my mom going to vote. I don't remember her going to do jury duty, but I do also...
When a society sequesters itself, it fails to understand and simultaneously is misunderstood by the outside world in which it lives. That misunderstanding leads to distrust, and distrust leads to suspicion, and suspicion leads to resentment, and worse. And the consequences are not just felt in Nazi Germany or through Europe. They were felt here in the United States as well. In 1939, a ship, the St. Louis, left Europe with 937 German Jewish refugees headed for Cuba. The German government pressured Cuba, and the ship was not allowed to block. The ship then tried to come to the United States, but the U.S. government refused to let them land. The Jewish community in the United States at that time had no relationships outside of its own self-imposed ghettos. They lived off to themselves, very quiet, and they could do nothing. The ship went back to Europe, and a large percentage of those passengers were killed in the Nazi death camps.
Anybody remember what happened in 1992? The Korean American community? Yes, yes. How quickly we forget how important it is to be involved. We forgot. In 1992, the problem was they didn't identify any Korean American community leaders to reach out to. They didn't have any relationship with any elected officials and police. So the Korean American community suffered. Almost 20 years later now, 20 years later, where is LA right now? Not a single Korean American LA councilman in California. So 20 years later, they haven't advanced that much. And so we learn from that, and in Georgia we have, I think, 75,000 people, Korean American in the metro, 13 counties, and close to 100,000 people in the entire state of Georgia, and then I'm the only elected official.
The point is that in America, being involved is the key, and that different people can find different ways and different organizations in which to participate based on their own personal passions. In the process, we become linked together along common bonds of interest, regardless of our differing histories or culture.
For those of you who came to America, you have the opportunity to fulfill your dreams. Many of those other countries, they never had that opportunity. But that dream comes in two parts. And part one is immigration. And you were here, you immigrated to the United States. You remember my formula. Migration equals immigration plus assimilation. And part two of that is the assimilation. And in part two, the assimilation must be a continuous process worked on by you for as long as you are in America. And if you were to ever achieve living in that shining city upon the hill. Perhaps.
So we'll generally give him as small as 2 and as many as 5 people to interview, and then the governor will spend 15 or 20 minutes with each individual. Question 32 on the questionnaire is describe your civic involvement, your community service. And I will suggest to you that if the response is either none or if it's shallow, they're not going to meet the governor. I would suggest to you that if it is limited to that individual's culture, they're less apt to meet the governor. Because when you're on the bench as a judge, for instance, for Gwinnett County, there's not only going to be Korean Americans in front of you, or Jewish Americans in front of you.
It's your patriotic duty to learn to speak English fluently, to become proficient. Force yourself out of your comfort zone. Get involved in cultural, sports activities that force you to speak English only. It's your patriotic duty to help organize and support a Korean American for local and state public office. And I've had this conversation many, many times. I believe that. And we have this locus of Korean Americans in this area that we're in right now, and we are represented by. We're represented by someone else. And they take your vote for granted.
Since the popular image of Korean American are business people in the mainstream, Korean ethnic can segmented as an entrepreneur. Korean is in U.S. as a whole are 3 times more likely than other Asian Americans to be self-employed.
I even changed my name into James. I used to be Chongho. My American friend called me Chongho, and when I came here in 1997, I chose the name James because it's the most popular name. Everybody can name my name. I'm James. I just want to be a good neighbor to my neighbors. When my neighbor's son is graduating from high school, I bought a Bible for him. I don't know whether he was a Christian, but I still bought a Bible for him. So rapidly our Korean community is rising up, and I think it's being recognized by the main society. And 2020 will be different. In 2040 it will be quite different. So I'm proud to be a neighbor and citizen of this country.
And I believe Koreans are the living example of what has been an American trait as well, historically, of industriousness. Starting with no money, almost no money, starting an individual business, taking incredible risk, working long hours and producing, being a success in a small business. That is really quintessentially an American thing, and in many ways, even though we should be involved more in politics and other areas, that the Korean American experience is actually communicating something very valuable and reminding the American culture of what its history is.
As a former vice president of the Korean Undergraduate Students Association at Emory University, one of the activities that I'm very proud of participating in is volunteering to teach English at CPACs. Several of our students from our organization would go weekly to participate and help the elderly learn English. And I think
Number one is register to vote. Doesn't even matter if you vote or not, just register. Okay. Number two, introduce yourself to your local elected official. 어디 살아도 county commissioner is important. Gwinnett County 사시면 you should know Charlotte Nash by name. You should know Bert Nasuti. Oh, he's not anymore. Lynette Howard. You should know people like Shirley Lassiter, Bob McClure. If you don't know who those people are, they control your money.
제가 미국 사람만 있는 미팅에 굉장히 많이 하지만 자주 가거든요. 근데 미팅에 가면은 전부 다 백인 남자예요. 그리고 백인 여자 하나 있고 가끔 까만 사람이 있어요. 그러면은 저는 자연히 이렇게 둘러보고 그 까만 남자 옆으로 가서 앉아요. 제가 저를 보니까. 그래서 왜 그런가 가만히 생각했더니 제가 그 사람하고 같이 아이덴티파이를 하고 있는 거예요. 그래서 나가려고 그러다가도 줄어들어요. I have a fear. 그래서 우리가 이 그룹으로 그런 fear가 있는 게 아닌가. 우리가 그래서 그럴 때 제 생각에는 내가 미팅에 갔을 때 어떤 사람이 친절하게 나한테 내 손을 붙잡고 This is your turn to talk. 그때는 제가 얘기를 해요. 그렇지만 내가 나한테 말할 기회를 안 주고 가만히 있으면은 2시간이건 3시간이건 그 미팅에서 한 말도 안 하고 그냥 나와요.
아틀란타 생활을 돌이켜보니까 생각만 했지 전혀 관계를 안 하고 살았던 것 같아요. 근데 가만 보니까 오늘 이 어린아이들도 오고 젊은이도 왔는데 좀 우리 아들놈이 법대 가겠다고 그러는데 이렇게 보니까 이 어토니 제너럴도 좀 만날 수 있게 해준다던가 그리고 우리 교회 젊은이들한테도 이 흑인이 육군 대장을 했다는 것도 좀 만나게 해준다던가 이거 하면 되는데 그걸 안 하는 것 같아요. 이게 연관을 못 시키는 것 같아요. 제가 나의 그 리얼리티와 내 생각이 이게 안 되는 것 같아요.
And in Atlanta, it's very spread out. People don't have a shared history like New York area or LA. And we need to have people who would be thoughtful, not for their own selfish reasons, even bad selfish reasons, but to thoughtfully create events and institutions where we would bring people together for youth, for senior citizens, for children, for family training, and we need to thoughtfully create community. And instead of sitting back and criticizing the lack of community, we need community creators, or I hate to use that word, but community organizers who are thoughtful and do a good job of doing that. So.
I had doubts whether or not my district, the citizens in my district, was ready to elect a non-white person to represent them in the state house. It's predominantly white, but as I went door to door, I realized that was just nonsense. That's just dumb to think that way.
우리가 로드맵을 지도를 잘 보고 잘 찾아가면은 제대로 하이웨이로 들어가는 거고 지도 안 보고 대충 잘 될 거야 하고 하다 보면 트웨일바에 뺑뺑 도는 거고 기름은 기름대로 없애고 자동차는 자동차로 닳고 결국 트웨일바에서 뺑뺑 돌다가 제자리 오고 그럴 수가 있어요. 좀 그거는 어폐가 있고 좀 익스트림한 그 말씀이지만 저희들이 발전하고 하려면은 좀 더 계획적으로 우리가 어디 있는지 알고 어디로 가는지요. Where we from, where we going 이것이 알고 우리를 보면서 이 사회를 이끌고 가정을 이끌면 더 좋을 것 같습니다.